All right, Entree Architect community, it's 4 p.m. Eastern, which means it's time for the Entree Architect Context and Clarity Context and Clarity live conversation for Thursday, April 14th, 2022. Thanks for joining us. As you get here, say hi. Let us know that you're here and let us know where you're joining the conversation from. Our guest today is very far away from where I'm sitting right now, so we may get into that just momentarily, but we want to know where all of you are. Say hi when you get here, even if you're just multitasking or listening in. That's all right. Let us know that you're here. But the reason that we come here every weekday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern is for one reason, so that we can find clarity around the things that matter most to you, the architect. It doesn't matter if you're the employee of a firm or you own your own firm. Maybe you've circled a date on the calendar and you said 2022 is my year and you're on the runway to starting your own thing. If that's the case, you have 3 more quarters of the year to go. So, time to launch that thing. If you do own your own firm, maybe you have for a year or 10 years or 28 years, and you're starting to rethink or reimagine what that firm could or maybe even should be. We might get into that today as well. All of the topics that we cover, one topic every day, they all fall under the broad umbrella of the business of architecture, and they're all the need to know topics for the success of small firm architects just like you. So thanks for joining us again. Say hi when you get here. It's great to see you here. It's great to see where everybody is. As I'm looking at my screen right now, I believe that I see Scott Thrift from drizzly San Francisco on the screen first. And if that's the case, then Scott is the winner of today's John Kenny Memorial Crocheted Bathtub Award. That's the award that we give away for the first person into the room every day. So, Scott, thanks for joining us from San Francisco. I see him both on LinkedIn and on Facebook. It's drizzly on both sides, both platforms over there in San Francisco. So, welcome, Scott. Glad you're here. Chris Novelli wants to know if the guest can win the Crocheted Yacht Award. Maybe they can. We have not encountered that yet, so maybe that award will go to our guest today. Benita, thank you for the wave from Atlanta. And Jefferson, welcome back from Los Angeles. Jefferson, although being a committed Californian, is originally from Michigan. He's a graduate of the University of Michigan, and his little "Go Blue" there is a hint, maybe, at who our special guest is today. John Jones, welcome back. He says, "My last official work hour for the next 10 days." All right, wow. The kids' school break or vacation next week, spring break time. He's happy to spend it multitasking with the Entre Architect family here. Well, thanks for spending your last work hour. Better say it that way. That sounds much better. Thanks for joining us from Connecticut today, John, and Nicole from Arizona and the land of Twitch. All right. So right now I see Twitch and I see Facebook and I see LinkedIn. So we don't see anybody from YouTube or Twitter yet, but maybe as the conversation goes along, we will find some more folks from around the internet to join us. If you are joining from Facebook right now and you're commenting, but your comment is not showing up on the screen, on the right-hand side of the screen, like you see some others right now, it is because you're in a private Facebook group. You're either joining from the Entre Architect Community Facebook group, which is a private Facebook group just for architects, or you're joining from the Architects and Allies group, which is also a private Facebook group, but that's that's a group for everybody in the AEC industry. So both of those are private groups. Facebook has privacy policies, which we, of course, must adhere to. So if you're commenting, your comments aren't showing up on the screen, there's a URL right now at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. It's chat.restream.io/FB, like Facebook, for instance. If you put that into your browser, a couple of clicks later, you can give Facebook permission to speak to Restream, which is the platform that we use here for these simulcasts. And like I said, a couple of clicks later, you should be connected and your comments should start showing up on the screen from one of those Facebook groups. So check that out, chat.restream.io/FB. That should be the solution to all of your problems. At least we like to think so. Daniel, thanks for joining from Southern California on YouTube. Glad you're here as well. And Harold says, good evening from the waiting room of his allergist. Okay. Glad that you're joining us today, Harold. Thanks for being a waiting room visitor. Glad that you're maybe, is that multitasking? I don't know. Thanks for being here. Either way. All right. And then anybody else that's coming in, as you get here, say hi. Let us know that you're here. It's great to see everybody and where you're from. Um, we're going to introduce our guest here momentarily, and I am absolutely positive that we're going to have a fascinating conversation today. We've had over the course of the past month and a half, we've had some technology type topics, and this is another technology topic. It's pretty high tech topic. It may be a scary topic. It may be an exciting topic. It is certainly part architecture, part technology, part philosophy. We were just talking about that backstage before we went live. But whatever it is, I think it will be a fun and fascinating conversation here. Katharine, before I introduce our guest, first of all, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
I completely forgot to
It's all right.
introduce Katharine. Hi, Katharine.
I'm getting used to that. Hello.
Yeah, sorry. Joining us from Massachusetts today.
Indeed. Yep, I'm here. It's also drizzly here, so coast to coast drizzle today.
All right. It's actually bright and sunny here in the middle of the country.
All right. Good to know that's coming.
Yeah. We sent the drizzles, actually, the drizzles and tornadoes and such were here last night. So hopefully just the drizzles are headed your way.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of those tornadoes.
That's good. That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What have I forgotten? What else have I forgotten in the course of our introduction here?
You haven't forgotten
guest?
Nothing. Yes, I think it's time for our guest. I'm so excited to hear what he has to say.
All right. Well, let me just jump right into it then. Before I do that, I see Pam and Michelle, both from San Diego, or La Mesa in San Diego. So welcome to both of you joining us here today. Our guest today is an architect, an author, an educator, and I say a futurist. He's exploring the intersection between emergent technology, the practice of architecture, and the future of construction. Also, maybe some philosophy in here, although he says he's not a philosopher. He's a co-founder of the architectural practice SPAN and a director of the Architecture and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Design at the University of Michigan. Dr. Matias del Campo, welcome to Context and Clarity Live. No, we can't hear you at the moment. And while we're working out the audio here, I alluded to this earlier. He is in Cambodia. He's joining us from Cambodia right now, where it's about 3:00 in the morning. So,
jeez, well, that's pretty dedicated. I noticed that. Dedicated. I'm glad that he followed the wardrobe suggestion that we always send to the guests, but not many follow unless they're architects.
Everybody's got to wear black.
Yep, all black.
All right, Matias, can you hear us? Okay, we can't hear you though. Let's see. All right, despite maybe it's the AI is blocking us here. Ken Crutcher, hello, welcome from Detroit. Sorry, Katharine, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a private chat. If it comes to that, I guess he could write in there and you could read what he says. Like you read, no, he's not going to do that. All right.
Yeah. That would get
what else
difficult,
could we
I think.
do? I'm practiced at that.
So we had this problem earlier with the camera, and that we were able to. I say we. He was able to get it working. Is your are your earbud things not showing up in the settings at all? What happens? Yeah, I don't know if that made a difference. Okay. All right. We'll see if the old turn it off and turn it back on works here.
Mm-hmm. That's what always worked for the computers.
I had a professor when I was in school a long time ago that used to absolutely lose it when things would go wrong, and she'd turn it off, and then reboot it. All right. How are we doing now?
How about now?
Nope.
I think he's real. He looks the way I've seen him look.
You think he's real? or that's
Well,
Nicole's
Nicole
question.
wanted
Is
to
he
know if
real
is
or
he
is he an
real?
AI robot? Yeah. What happens if you unplug your headset? No, that didn't do anything.
Nope. Well, we have this little button, need help over here. Maybe if you press that, that won't help.
What's that? Oh,
I
that's
don't
a chat with support.
Oh, okay.
Oh, let's see. It's it was working earlier. The let's see. So it must not be restream settings, I guess. Is it your system settings on your computer?
Is the volume on comp turned up? Oh, on computer. Yeah. Oh, he was fine when we were talking backstage.
Yeah.
All right, and then
Or
maybe just take off your headphones
again.
and unplug them or something. Go for a different.
He actually tried that, I think.
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh.
All right. Well, we'll try it one more time.
Well, I'm just thinking
Speaking
about other
of
things.
technology.
What other things that have gone wrong in our year or something in here? Like we had a person on a yacht that we couldn't hear very well.
Mm-hmm.
We've had people kind of with construction going on nearby them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have.
I think some dogs barking.
Yep.
We were talking to somebody who kept going out and in, out and in, out and in all the time. Not the yacht person. Who's
Yeah, I don't remember who that was. I do remember that though.
Maybe it was Michelle Mazer.
Oh, I think you're right. I think it may have been.
Oh,
all right. Can you hear me now?
I hear you now. Yes, we do.
Hear him now. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Isn't that like the most annoying thing? You're talking about high tech and the most simple thing doesn't work.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's life.
Well, that's because they're listening. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, the AIs that are controlling it all are listening, and they're it's kind of like Murphy's Law, I guess.
Yeah, right.
But that's all right. We're here, and it's for what whatever frustration and whatever comes of that. It's absolutely amazing that the three of us can have a conversation. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana. Katharine's outside of Boston, and you're in Cambodia right now.
Right.
And we can have this conversation. Plus, we have all these people over here in our audience that are commenting, and they're all plugged in. And I talk about this all the time, but in our audience, we'll have people from the East Coast to the West Coast of the United States, over in Ghana, over in the UK, in Russia, in Australia, all at the same time. So the technology is absolutely amazing when it works. so that's
right. Ghana. Yeah, it's amazing. It is amazing. So anyway, we're glad you're here.
I'm glad you're here, and it's worked out, and it's perfectly fine. So maybe the place to start this conversation about AI and architecture. There's so much here. I think we could talk about this probably for weeks. You've dedicated your career to it, so obviously we can talk about it for a long time. But why don't we just start with what is artificial intelligence?
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Katharine. Thanks also for the invitation to join me today. Context and Clarity Live. The question, what is AI, is a really good one. I don't think I know that. the answer to that yet. So, but I can give you some hints. So on the one side, AI is basically an umbrella term for a variety of different methodologies. So there is not the one AI. There is machine learning, which is a subsection of AI, and then machine learning is divided into a variety of other methods that you have heard about, probably like deep learning. So it's like a technique in a technique in a technique, and then there's like this overarching term called AI that describes that. But it's a very general purpose term, to be honest with you. And just to clarify what is underneath that large umbrella is basically a series of methods that allows algorithms to mine data for specific information. And I think that's like the main thing that happens here is that you have enormous amounts of data, which in itself is inert and might not be that helpful. And also because it's so big, no human can actually process that in their lifetime. And neural networks, which basically are used to interrogate the data for underlying patterns, for example, in the data that give you information about specific context that you're interested in. And that's why it can apply. That's why it can be applied to pretty much everything in our lives that produces data in one way or the other. So, and I mean, I could go on here now. Like maybe I can ask like the next question that would come after what is AI, which is why to use AI in general, right? What is so good about that? Yeah, and the main thing here is that it's much better to teach a machine how to learn instead of what to do. Yeah. Because this is the difference between expert systems and learning systems. Once you have a machine that learns how to do things, it can do those things on its own, and you don't need to retrain it every single time the task changes.
That's really fascinating, and that's you know, it reminds me. We were talking before we went live about Neil Leach, who's a colleague of yours. He's spoken to my pro practice class before, and in my class, the students have to come up with an idea and pitch it as a business, sort of like in Shark Tank. And a couple of years ago, the students came up with this idea. They called it AI Apprentice. And the idea came actually from historic preservation. They were wondering about how to make, I don't know if it's right to say historic preservation easier, but you've got all the measurements and how do you document capitals of columns and all of these details that we don't even use anymore. And so it started out with 3D scanning. And then they had the idea of, okay, well, we can document what it is, but we're losing a lot of the skills. We're losing a lot of the craftspeople that can create these things. So what if we have today's craftspeople teach via machine learning, I guess, teach the AI how to then reproduce these things, and then that essentially becomes the AI apprentice. That eventually you have this, and I guess by extension, you have to have some sort of computer-aided manufacturing or something to carve a new capital. But they had come up with this process of allowing the AI to learn the craft and then be able to reproduce. If for instance, there was a disaster in an area where Washington, D.C., as an example, how would you restore a lot of the architecture there if we don't have the craftspeople to do that work anymore? And so rather than teaching the AI how to do a task, allow it to learn all of these things, as you said, and then become, I guess, the craft thing, the craft person, the craft machine. So I think to me, it's fascinating in the way that you just said that. It's a different way of thinking, I think, than we typically do about tools, if I can call it that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Also, the question of the tool. But I mean, just to go back to your preservation example, which I think is a great example to look into, because it actually uncovers a couple of aspects that are important here. Like on the one side, there's always, of course, the question: do you need to use an AI to do that? Right? Because I mean, we have 3D scanning, we have CNC tools that can understand how to replicate a capital with high precision. But it's of course always going to be, a replication of an existing capital. For example, in this case, the other question would be if you want a neural network to create a new or different capital. Yeah, that's I think where things become interesting, because those things are possible with a neural network as long as you train it on enough different capitals. It will understand what is the major features of a capital, what makes it a capital, and then out of that being able to extract or generatively create a capital that is different to all others but still in the same family, so to speak. That's what you would need an AI for. Now the question of craftsmanship, I think, is more complex, because I don't think that it's possible for a neural network to extrapolate from the information it can get the subtleties of craftsmanship. Yeah, because there's a lot of very complex neural processes going on in a master carpenter or a master ceramics ware maker and things like that, where it has to do with tactility, with knowledge, with experience, with intuition. Yeah, and especially things like intuition or talent are very vague terms to.
Okay.
The machines are shutting us down. Looks like I'm looking at the dashboard here, and it looks like his bandwidth has dropped to 0. So hopefully it's able to hang on here. And
is that what those bars are over there?
Yeah. Mark says gremlin. So okay, here's a question: Are gremlins an AI?
Does AI? Well, I guess it has to be programmed, right? So I'm just thinking about trolls, and trolls are humans who just. Oh, okay. There we go again.
He's back. Oh, now we can't hear you. Oh no. So you have to go. It's like having OCD. You have to log out, do it 2 or 3 times.
I think they has a lot. I watched all of the things all of the YouTube videos that you suggested, and I really recommend them. They're pretty fascinating. You don't have to watch all of them. There's some repetition between them, but especially that talk he had with that student. I think he was a student. I think it was one of the first ones you connected to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Conversation. Yep. All right. How about now?
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. I mean, my Wi-Fi looks okay, so I don't know exactly what's happening here. It might be somebody mentioned before.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's completely fine. I like to say that by doing these shows live, I mean we're working without a net, so we're used to things not always going right. So glad that we're able to keep it going at this point. When you dropped out, you were kind of you were talking about the subtleties of craft and AI. Manuel says the problem with classical architecture is that too much of its creation is personal, i.e., the rules are not really meant to be followed exactly, but interpreted. And I think that's probably part of what you're talking about as well in terms of craft. So you mentioned a couple of times neural networks. So can you just explain what you mean by neural networks?
Yes. So I mentioned before that AI is sort of an umbrella term, and then we have like a variety of methods underneath them. And there is like different families of ideas about AI, and there's a variety of different concepts about it. There's, for example, Bayesians. There is symbolists. There's evolutionaries. There's like a variety of different ideas of how AI could work. But the most successful one turned out to be the connectionists. And that's actually like the vast, vast majority of the things we're using today that we consider quote unquote AI are neural networks that are based on this connectionist idea. And what they do is basically they sort of try to encapsulate the neural network, the biological neural network, which is our brain, where we can, through a variety of connections, form, so to speak. Try to take that, encapsulate it in a mathematical formula that can be applied in a computational algorithm. And a neural network is basically, for example, a generator that produces images, yeah, that goes through a variety of layers. And the more layers you have, the more complex those things become to produce at the end an output image. Or this would be, for example, with images, but you can do this with everything that actually has somehow information, has somehow collected data. It can also be numbers and so on. And just to give you a quick example of things that you might know, every one of you has signed a check and written numbers on a check in the bank. Rest assured, no human ever saw these numbers. So those numbers go actually through a neural network that is highly trained to recognize numbers. And it can recognize numbers because it understands a pattern of different grayscales in an image. So if it's a black and white image, it goes from 0 to 255, 0 being white and 255 being black. So it has numbers. And the more it sees those numbers repeat in a pattern, the more it understands, okay, there's a specific pattern behavior in that image. At the beginning, a human has to train the neural network to understand this image is a 0 with labeling, this image is a 1, this image is a 3, this image is an 8. Because we've been doing this for more than 20 years now in the banking system, there's a very, very high reliance that this is correct, what the neural network will see in that written text. So that's why we can rely that those things are correct. So this is how a neural network, through training, through labeling, and then through running through a neural network with layers, can understand in this case what numbers are. But you can expand this to so many other fields. Yeah? Automated cars are similarly trained to understand what is a pedestrian, what's a sidewalk, what's a street, and so on. And of course, in architecture, you can do the same. You can train a neural network to understand what's a window, what's a door, what's a specific, and use that not only can understand parts of a plan, for example, but we can also use it generatively so that it can also output a plan.
So when we think about, what's coming for architecture and this, how can AI be used in architecture? What do you think? I don't know if the right way to think about it is short term versus medium term versus long term. But what do you think in the near future? What kind of impact can AI have on the practice of architecture and the process of constructing our designs?
Mm-hmm. First of all, I think this is going to come faster than we all think. For me, the development currently is on a speed that is absolutely incredible. I'm just writing a second book that I already had to basically redo halfway through because half of the methods were already outdated at the moment I wrote them down. Yeah, so it's really very fast. And I think you have to differentiate here between two areas of architectural production. Like I would define them as being the part that is caring about the wicked problem and the part that is caring about the tame problem. And in engineering, this is a term used very, very often to describe a variety of different problems that you can encounter. So the tame problem would be things in architecture like material consumption optimization of paths within an apartment, structural engineering, life cycle studies, like all the things that are like the hardcore I don't want to call them just engineering part of architecture, because I think it's as valuable as the other things we do. So, but more like the ground, the back to earth, very pragmatic problems. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
And then on the other side, you have the wicked problem, which is about sensibility and aesthetics, and how is it culturally rooted in our current society? What does it tell in terms of ecology? What does it tell also in terms of society and societal progress and changes, which is as much part of the architecture problem, right?
Right.
And the interesting thing for me is that you can use AI basically in both areas. Yeah, so it's not limited to one or the other, right? In doing so, it creates a very interesting interface between these two problems. Yeah, so it's communicating with each other through AI, like what we as architects would also do when we design, right? When we design, I would argue that we have like a variety of different aspects in our mind. It's not only, oh, we have to fulfill the program, or oh, we only can use concrete for this project. We're like meshing all the things together with aspects of, what does it mean culturally? What does it mean in terms of society? What does it mean in terms of also aesthetics and beauty and elegance and all these sort of things? Yeah? Or the contrary of it, if you want that. Yeah. But it meshes those aspects really nicely together. And it's one of the things why I'm so fascinated about this current development in architecture and in the AI, because it's really meshing those things together. Like ethics, for example, a very important issue. Like, how do you ethically create architecture using data that is maybe scraped, or how to avoid bias? So there's like all those things here. I know I cannot narrow it down to a simple answer. It is something that is very rich in terms of what it does for the discipline. So I hope I didn't confuse the audience more than I was able to clarify.
Well, you just brought up ethics and bias, and I think to some people, maybe many people, that may be a surprise. Oh, what does AI have to do with that? But I heard you in another interview talking about that, and I think it really speaks to when we ask that question. What are the ethics, and how do ethics and bias come into this whole conversation about AI? I think, it looks like he's frozen up again. So I may be talking to the AI, but I think it has to do also with the authorship and the agency of architects as we go into the future of using AI. So I will likely have to repeat that.
You probably will, yeah.
First, remember that, and then repeat it.
I'm kind of curious, as not to make it all about me, but as a small firm architect, when is that going to come into my the possibilities for my own practice? Like, how long is that going to be? If he says it's happening pretty quickly,
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really great question. Hello.
Hi. I feel bad for you. Did you stay up or did you wake up? Is this the end of your day and you can't wait to go to sleep, or you did get up recently? I just feel bad for you.
No, I wook up.
Okay, that's good.
No worries.
That's good. All right. I don't know. I just was wondering.
It is amazing to me that you've joined us at 3:00 in the morning. So again, thank you for that. You mentioned ethics and bias, and I was saying that I think that might surprise a lot of people when you think about AI. Well, what does that have to do with bias and ethics? But I think that's also sort of the door into this conversation about authorship and agency. As an architect, how much control will you have over this, and then who else has control, and where's all this data coming from, and all this information. So when you're looking at this and talking about ethics and bias and those types of topics, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, and thank you. So it all comes down to the aspects of data. You mentioned it already. So one of the things a lot of people are not aware about is that AIs do not do anything on its own as long as you don't train it to do something specific. And the first step to do this is to collect data that you want to use and to use for the tasks you want to fulfill. And let me give you an example. In the ARIL laboratory, we're currently working on a project called Common House. And the idea of this is to create a neural network that is able to create apartment plans on its own. But we want to go there is already examples out there that can do that, by the way. It's not entirely new. But we're trying to go beyond what has been done so far, in that we are very aware that examples that were used before were heavily biased towards Western architecture. So the data sets used were only apartment plans from America and Europe, basically. So they were encapsulating, of course, only a specific culture. They're not able to encapsulate a more, let's say, global approach to apartments or specific quirks and ideas for specific regions of the world about housing and living. And they take into account climate conditions, for example, the changes all over the world. So there were a lot of problems with that approach. And we are trying to take the more ethical and hopefully a little bit more complete approach to this by collecting apartment plans from all over the world. But it doesn't end there. The problem is not just collecting the plans. You also have to annotate them, label them, so that a neural network understands what's the semantic content of the image it is seeing. Because if you show a neural network just an apartment plan, it's just a pile of pixels for that neural network. It doesn't understand what's a living room, what's a sleeping room, what's a toilet. So you have to label it, which means a person has to go there, mark up a room, and say this is a living room. Yeah. And in order, again, to avoid bias, what we did is we crowdsourced an effort all over the world of having people from all over the world label plans, so that we try to avoid the traps of going again into a bias problem here by just saying, oh, we just have a bunch of students from a specific university labeling them. So we're trying to broaden the whole thing. But that's also the beauty, I think, of this whole approach, is that it changes architecture from the idea of the sole genius who is just going to sketch the perfect apartment plan to basically crowdsourcing the idea of living, of housing, yeah, and understanding that there's like a far larger understanding. And we already see surprises in the results we're getting out of it, yeah, of things we would have not expected. About, for example, room sizes and things like that. But once you have gone through this whole process, yeah, and trying to avoid at least some of the biases that we already introduced in architecture to working networks, we can also go ahead and do interesting things, like, for example, optimizing social housing. Yeah, like how can we, if we have a specific plot size, we have a specific plot, how can I distribute in that plot apartments for social housing in the best possible way? Yeah, and you can expand this to every area. I just mentioned one of them, but this is something that can be, of course, expanded in every single area of architecture design. I just mentioned housing as one example, but every type that you can think of can be treated like that. But at the same time, it means that we as architects, there's a lot of work for architects in this, yeah, because somebody has to select what's a qualitatively good plan. Somebody has to take that data set and then also say this is a good apartment plan, this is a bad apartment plan, and that's where we as architects come in, because somebody will have to label that and do this at least at the beginning of this whole thing. So, in my opinion, that's going to really help in on the one side, creating something that is hopefully ethically a little bit more rounded, as we are in the ethical discussion, but at the same time also allows to improve on what our discipline is doing.
Do you think, when we look at the impact of AI on the practice of architecture, or on maybe the profession of architecture, will it have a bigger impact on smaller firms than on larger firms, do you think? Or is that going to be sort of distributed?
That's a question I get a lot. It's hard to say at the moment without sounding a little bit too gloomy. because the problem is that once, so creating data sets in general is not cheap. Yeah. So at least for now, because, for example, I do not rely on people working for nothing. Yeah. So whoever is labeling is getting at least a little bit paid for this. And this is basically how all this sort of labeling thing works for every discipline, not just architecture. On the other hand, what I see happening is that large firms are rather more, maybe have rather the funds to be able to generate their own data sets and work with specialized data sets and be able to use them for their own purposes. I generally think that this whole new paradigm of architecture should be entirely open source so that everyone can actually benefit from the data sets everyone is doing. So, for example, our data sets that we're currently creating in the ARI lab are going to be accessible for free for everyone to use and do their own experiments with it. So, but we have to do this now. We have to make that now a common thing in architecture. If we don't do it now, then companies, large companies, will just be hoarding the data for themselves and closing off everybody else to use them, like other companies are doing these days anyways already, as we know. Yeah, no, I'm not going to mention names here, but this has to be far more transparent. Once it's transparent, every architect can use that for his own benefit, and also every architect, according to his, I don't want to say talent, but insight into this idea, can do something good and innovative, and hopefully, which becomes a good contribution to the discipline and architecture at large. However, what I see in the future happening is that there's got to be first of all, it's very likely that simple architectural tasks can be automatized entirely without having the need for a human intervention. Yeah. But when it comes to things like place, architecture that actually has a certain quality, spatial, aesthetical, or is provocative, or in other ways somehow contributes to the built environment, that's, I think, an area where AI is not there yet. And I'm not very confident that this is going to come anytime soon, because the one thing you have to understand, all these things that happen in AI are based on our understanding of how basically our human brain operates when it's doing things. Right? So we can, for example, by now understand a little bit of how dreaming works, how hallucination works in our mind. And we're able to encapsulate that in neural networks and use them for different purposes. But we still do not understand exactly how a creative process works in our mind, or how creativity works in our mind. Like these sort of things, we don't know yet how they work. So we cannot encapsulate them yet in something that an AI can use. Meaning, we still can have dominance in those areas as designers, architects, artists, or whatever it is. This also means, by the way, creatively using AI. Yeah. So what's going to happen is some processes are going to be automatized in architecture. Large companies will do their own AI thing. And there's very likely going to be like small firms that are sort of boutique firms that do everything by hand as something that has symbolic meaning and value, right? It's intentionally done by hand. Maybe not even a computer involved. That would be fun. Yeah. So yeah.
So they're creating.
You see
their
these
own
developments
craft.
in other areas. Yeah. You see these developments already happening in other areas.
So if you look at the practice of architecture, let's say, if we imagine we're 10 years out from today, and AI progresses the way that you imagine that it will, what's the best case scenario for architects, and how they're practicing 10 years from today?
Mm-hmm. I would like to pick up on that question you have on a comment that Manuel Merkel just wrote in the comments here, saying Adolf Loos said that architecture is only the monument or the tomb, meaning that it's about transcendence, the here and now, and therefore transcending the social or even the physical needs of our clients. So how does AI deal with transcendence? And this exactly hits on the point I was just talking about before. Yeah. So First of all, it's really funny to me to hear that because it reminds me also a lot of my own teacher, who was Hans Hollein, who also said the same thing, that architects only do two things. They either dig down or pile up, which has to do with monuments and the idea also that the tomb or the monument is like the first architecture. It seems to like Viennese, and I'm Viennese. Obviously we have this sort of weird relationship to monuments and tombs and architecture in general. But the important question for me here is, how does AI deal with transcendence? And that's, I think, an amazing question, because the main problem here is that AI doesn't have a concept of what transcendence is. Yeah, a lot of very often we actually allocate certain thinking, certain let's say philosophical ideas that we as humans ponder about a lot to AIs, and AIs are not as intelligent as we think they are. Yeah. So we basically really attribute those things to AI that they cannot do, and they have no idea what it is. They can interpolate between data very well. So if somebody, for example, feeds an AI with every single book written about transcendence, it will come up with a text that sounds very, very convincing about transcendence, but it does not mean that it understood what transcendence is supposed to be, right? It's AI is an amazing machine, but it doesn't really think. Position itself in the world the way we humans, with certain understanding about what it means to love, what it means to hate, what it means to be passionate about a specific idea in architecture, what it means, what even is beauty or ugliness, or like all those things that basically transcend the common and the pragmatic. Yeah. So we can somehow make AI in a certain way emulate that by interpolation, but it does not mean that it really would do like a major contribution to change our idea about transcendence. So the book about transcendence and AI would produce would be an interesting book, but it probably would not connect it to something different and new and exciting and provocative. Yeah. Like one of the things, for example, about our mind, which is amazing, is that we're constantly misfiring in our mind. Yeah, so we have misreadings, we have things like déjà vus, we have, we have like hallucinations, like all the sort of strange things that our mind do are highly interesting, exactly in terms of like creative culture, right? Because I think those misfirings, those misreadings, the understanding, for example, that a mistake could be an advantage. Yeah, are profoundly human features that AI is not yet able to somehow grasp or understand.
That is an important distinction, I think, and maybe one that we when we watch movies, Terminator or something like that we're worried about that that may not come to pass. What worries you the most about AI?
So here's the thing. I mean, movies like Terminator and The Matrix and so, they all fall for me into the category of comedy, because this is not going to happen. Yeah. I mean, again, we are attributing. I mean, this is exactly why, for example, this whole anxiety about AI comes from. In my opinion, it's just a Hollywood construct about something that actually does not exist like that, and most likely will never exist like that because it's so complicated to achieve it. Just very briefly here, there's like this distinction between generalized AI generalized AI and I call it expert AI. I think that the term is different, but let me put it that way. Generalized AI would be something like, the machines in the agents in the Matrix or the Terminator. So machines that basically can do what we as humans do. So I'm sitting in this chair, I'm not falling down, so I'm maintaining balance. I can have this conversation with you, but at the same time, I'm thinking about my next thought. I can see you, so I have a visual input and so on. At the same time, my heart is pumping, my lungs are actually getting breath in and out and so on. Like there's all these processes we even are not conscious about, but they're happening in our body all the time. And each one of those is a highly complicated process and even more difficult to encapsulate in an AI. Yeah. So this is very, very hard to achieve. And the whole evolution or process of generalized AI actually grinded to a halt in the last couple of years because we became aware how complex it is actually to achieve that. So like robots that really look like humans and behave like humans and so on, like everything we see in all the science fiction movies, Commander Data in Star Trek to Eva in Ex Machina, I don't see that happening very soon. On the other side, the specialized AIs that only do one thing, but that one thing really very well, these are highly successful. And that's exactly where I think those things are going to come into play for us in architecture. Is like this idea of really starting to understand that those specialized AIs are going to help us to become better in our profession, I think. Yeah.
Seems like I was just going to say, it seems like people are afraid of it just showing up. But I think we're going to have to spend a lot of money to get it to work for us, right? So it's not like unless we're intentional about it, we don't have to worry about AI taking over our office. You know what I mean? Seems like they're not just going to show up in policeman outfits.
Most certainly not. I think that, yeah, I mean, first of all, we have to say really goodbye to these science fiction fantasies about AI. It's just not the way it is. It's, by the way, it's a very unfortunate term in any way, shape, or form because it's actually alluding to something it is not. Yeah. As somebody, I think it's Kate Crawford, who wrote a really fascinating book called The Atlas of AI. She said that AIs are probably neither artificial nor intelligent. Yeah. So when this term came up in the 1950s, the group of people who actually came up with that had also ideas about it. They wanted to, for example, call it synthetic intelligence and things like that. But AI just stuck. Yeah. And since then, we have this idea, like everyone who talks about AI, is that, oh, artificial intelligence. So they must be like us. They must be intelligent like us. But first of all, we have to ask, what is intelligence in general? There's not even a common explanation for that. So in any case, they will not show up like from one day to the next in the office. They're already creeping into our offices anyways, because like everyone, for example, is using a certain book delivery website, the famous one, who has generated the richest man in the world, I think. That, for example, proposes to you books to read. And it's doing that because there is an underlying neural network that actually learns your search behavior and then starts to propose or suggest books to you based on that. Yeah. So it's already there. Like every architecture office is already using, in one way or the other, neural networks without even knowing it. Yeah.
Yeah, that all of that is fascinating and scary, I think, in a way at the same time. As we wrap this up, so our audience is mainly small firm architects. So what is something that they can do, that they need to be doing now in order to really, I would definitely say, learn about the possibilities, but start to figure out some way to take advantage of the possibilities of artificial intelligence?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I have to say, I mean, I run myself with my partners under running a small architecture firm called Span. You mentioned at the beginning. And ever since we started Span, we always thought of technology as being something that gives us an edge versus the larger companies. So if we are able to handle it and understand better than the large companies, we can compete with them. Yeah. And I think this is still true today. So for companies that are like mid-sized, small-sized companies, AI can be enormously powerful because it can help you to, for example, analyze the problem better than you could before with more data and more information, of course, coming out of that in order to produce a better design or a faster design, even. Be faster in designing than you were before. Or for example, also to help to reduce the amount of, let's say, work that actually stops you from designing. Yeah. One thing we have been thinking about, for example, is wouldn't it be great to create a neural network that is able to check your plans if they are according to code or not, instead of you having to go by hand through that day by day, trying to figure out if your building is on code. Wouldn't it be great to just feed in a sketch of your plan, and then the neural network basically like 10 minutes later spits out and says, well, you see that part here has to be different because it's not up to code. So like completely mundane tasks in the architecture office can be reduced, I think, using neural networks, to the point where you as a designer can put more time in designing instead of, making lists or trying to figure out if it's up to code, or trying to figure out how much material it's actually using. Yeah. So those things, or for example, what's the ecological footprint of your building, much faster than we can do it now. So the advantage of those things, on the one side, I see the possibility for offices to just, move those mundane tasks to the AI world and rather focus really on what is interesting to you, if it is design, yeah, or to be faster, like in terms of engineering, for example. Like, what if you have a neural network that can, for example, propose a variety of different structural systems for your building in just a couple of minutes, yeah? So all those things are going to be great. But at the same time, I have to say the job will change either way. Yeah, because as I said before in the beginning, somebody has to train those neural networks first before they can do these things. And I'm completely convinced that we as architects have to do that. Yeah, we as architects have to engage with AI, no matter if it's just the training or collecting of data. In general, we have to engage with it, because if we don't do it, somebody else will do it for us. Yeah, and that might not be that good for the architecture discipline. So we have to engage with it.
I think those are excellent points. And I see Mark has posted here that AI is our savior. It'll give us more time, the most valuable and least available asset of the small firm architect. I can't wait until AI can be my second brain. Bring it on, he says. I think that's the right attitude.
Just one thing to it. Yeah, it's the right attitude, but there's also one thing, that every single time a new technology came into architecture, we thought the same thing. It's going to be, it's going to, we're going to be faster. It's going to save us time. Like, how many times have you heard that, Jeff, before, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've heard this many times. Every single time we as architects figure out how to still spend a lot of time. So I'm not...
Maybe we need to turn AI into something that manages our timesheets for us. I guess that's the...
Yeah. That makes a lot. Yeah, I like that.
If we came up with these little, like, we're worried about people doing things themselves with these little designing bots. I don't know what to call them. Let's call them design bots. So then if we were, like, if I were some Starchitect, I could make design bots to sell to people. They could buy my bot, and then it would design their edition the way I would design their edition, but they don't have to pay me. They just buy the bot.
Absolutely possible.
There you go. It's passive income right there.
We have already made tests if that's possible, actually. So we trained the neural network to replicate my design sensibility. Yeah. And to my surprise, it can do it. Yeah. So now we have to deal with it.
So how big is it? What does it look like? Is that a stupid question? I mean, is it like an attachment to the computer? Is it a program? Is it like a little box?
It's just some code in the cloud. It doesn't have a body.
It doesn't even exist.
Yeah, well, it does exist. Well, here we are again with a philosophical question.
Those of you that were not privy to our conversation before we went live, we were starting to delve into the philosophical, which I think is another fascinating tangent of this conversation. This is another one of those that I would be perfectly happy to sit here for hours and continue this conversation. But it's about 4 a.m. in Cambodia now. Maybe Matias needs to take a nap. I'm not sure. But we really appreciate your time and the thought and the effort and all the exploration and experimentation that you're putting into the world of artificial intelligence as it relates to architecture. And thanks for sharing all of this with us today.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. It was super fun having this conversation. If you want to have a follow-up anytime, we can focus maybe only on the philosophical part of it. Maybe as a last point, I would like to say that I'm pretty convinced that this work on AI and architecture is the first genuinely 21st century design method. If you think about computation design in general, like all the computational design methods we saw in the last 22 years were already invented in the 20th century. They were just refined in the last 22 years. But what we're doing with AI was not even possible 10 years ago. So this is the first, imprint on a new architectural design idea in the 21st century, if you ask me. Who knows? We will see. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's fascinating to think about as well. And so we will take you up on that offer. We'll take this conversation back up again in the future. I'd look forward to that. So thank you for that again. And to all of you out there in the audience, thanks for joining the conversation with us. Thanks for all of your comments and your questions over there on the right side of our screen as we see it. And look forward to the time when we can continue this conversation. As usual, I like to say to all of you, thank you for making context and clarity a thing. It's because of all of you showing up and asking these questions and engaging in these conversations every day that make it possible for us to have these conversations with people like Matias del Campo. So thank you for making context and clarity a thing. As we look towards next week on Context and Clarity Live, many of you are familiar with the SciArc panel discussion. It was called Basecamp, How to Be in an Office, that happened on March 25th, I believe. Next week on Context and Clarity Live, we're going to have a panel discussion of our own, not to talk about SciArc, not to talk about any of the panelists, but to have our own conversation about being in an office and what's important for students to know, for emerging professionals to know, and also for leaders to understand about the next generation of people that will be working in the profession. So that's what's coming up next week on Context and Clarity Live. My ask of you right now is to start thinking about people that you know, just like I did this week. Who do you know that would be interested in this conversation about AI and architecture? Who do you know that will be interested in a panel conversation about what it takes, what you need to know to work in an office, in an architecture office, and a career in architecture? So that's coming up next week. Until then, again, thanks to all of you. Appreciate all of you. My wish for all of you as we wrap this up is that you take a little bit of time to breathe and relax and find some way to rejuvenate, because we're going to do this all over again tomorrow and then back at it again on Monday and all of next week. So again, thanks for being here. Be well, stay safe, keep those around you safe and well. And I hope that I'll see you all somewhere sometime soon. Thanks, everybody.